Got some nice long hair.
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron, and you can follow me at The Draft Bard. You can follow us at Unbearable Sports on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and at Unbearable Sport on Twitter. We have an awesome show for you. We have not recapped the 2021 season yet. So rather than just having a normal, like, hey, let's just talk about the complete disappointment, I'm going to kind of add a little different type of style to it. So before the season even started, me and Blake, we went through and we kind of just graded where we thought we got better at. And we kind of went through and said, we got better here, we got worse here. And we talked through everything and said, this is where our team really should be at. Now, obviously, now it did not go the way that we expected. So I'm going to be walking through and just saying what was actually realistic, what actually happened, to just kind of help understand where this kind of disconnect happened between the team and obviously winning games, because we weren't really expecting that to happen. I saw that I predicted 10-7. Obviously, that didn't happen. And Blake predicted 9-8. That did not happen as well. We would have been happy with either one, but instead we got a bad record. So to me, what we're going to be going through is, where did we progress? Where did we regress? And then also talk through just this, essentially the studs and the duds. Where were we studs at? And where do we kind of fail overall as a team? So let's get into this. But let's go through. So starting out, let's get started on this offense, and no better position to start out with than this quarterback position. Now, with the quarterbacks, what we are kind of going through is, in the preseason, we lost Mitch Trubisky, and that was it. We brought in Andy Dalton. We brought in Justin Fields. So really, when we're looking at this, okay, well, we don't have Mitch anymore. And we're thinking, well, we brought in Andy Dalton. He's a better quarterback than Mitch. Mitch can run, but Dalton has been kind of that solid average quarterback. So this should be a plus. And Fields is coming in, and Fields should be better. So we were saying Dalton is better than Nick Foles, and Fields is better than Mitch. So we should be better, right? So Blake and I both agreed that we thought that this was a plus at the preseason. We thought that this was going to be a spot that we're better at. And now, as we all know, to me, this is one of the biggest spots that we regress, that we were complete duds at, was this quarterback position. I think we ranked 30th amongst all the other teams from an offensive perspective from passing. The quarterback position did not do anything. Now, we struggled to just hit 200 passing yards. I remember looking some days and we're like, we did not hit the 200-yard passing. Now who's to blame? It just seemed that this offense was dysfunctional, no matter who was at quarterback. When Nick Foles was out there, it seemed a little stale. It was honestly one of the best ran offenses that we had for this team, but the offense just overall was relatively stale, and it was not that great. And then you got Justin Fields out there. Now, Justin Fields was always trying to throw it deep, but it just wasn't working. We weren't able to get some of the complete games. We saw a couple of them, but as soon as it seemed like he started getting everything together, everything else started falling around. He got injured, he got banged up, he got COVID, and then we were no longer able to see Justin Fields out there. So unfortunately, Justin Fields, his show was done. His show was kind of cut short, and then we had to see Andy Dalton, who he was decent, but yet again, this passing game just wasn't there. So for Blake and I, during the preseason, we thought that this was going to be a stud position. We thought that this was going to be better, but just off the bat, this is honestly one of the biggest reasons why it was a dud season. This quarterback spot just was not what we expected it to be at all. And we're all kind of saying, man, we were apologizing to Mitch Trubisky saying, hey, I'm sorry that we were kind of criticizing you for being a bad quarterback. Now, I'm still not on that. Let's completely apologize to Mitch Trubisky because he still couldn't read a lot of the defenses or anything like that. But still, this team just looked to take a step back at quarterback because Mitch just seemed to get it going. He really did. And none of these quarterbacks could duplicate that. And for that, putting the big minus, the big dud mark on the quarterbacks. So the next position that we were going through on this offense was the running back position. Now, to bring back going back all the way to the preseason, the only running back we really lost was Cordero Patterson. Now, obviously, we still didn't have Tariq Cohen. We were hoping that we could get Tariq Cohen back. He's been injured. He's been banged up. We did not get him back. But what we ended up getting during this season was we did get Damian Williams and we got Khalil Herbert. Now, we didn't expect Khalil Herbert to do the things that he did. And we saw him a little bit in the preseason, but he really wasn't taking off like he did now. He wasn't breaking off, 60-yard runs, 40-yard runs. He was kind of sharing some time with Ryan Nall because we all know how Ryan Nall is in the preseason. Khalil Herbert wasn't turning a lot of heads, but we were at least saying in the preseason, we at least have running backs. Because I don't know if you guys remember back in the 2020 season, when David Montgomery went down, we're like, do we have a running back? Because Tariq Cohen was injured and we no longer had Montgomery. And it's like, okay, are we really going to run with Cordero Patterson? And we did. It didn't work too well, but yet again, the running game never really worked. But in 2021, we saw some progression because Blake and I, we both agreed that we thought that this was going to be a spot that we were going to get better at. Now, did we get better? I agree. I think that we got better at the running back position. I think as a whole, this is a stud group for me. We got better. We saw a lot of that progression rather than the regression that could have potentially happened. Even though that David Montgomery didn't break 4 yards a carry, you still saw the progression that he made, that just getting better as a leader, as a better running back, better receiver. He seemed to be more of a weapon rather than just being our running back. And then also you throw in Damian Williams, who, yeah, he didn't have the greatest of years, but still when he was at least out there, we actually had backup running backs. We actually had people that could help out that were out there. So Damian Williams was a big guy that honestly was able to produce a little bit, and he was a good depth piece. But then you throw in Khalil Herbert averaging 4.2 yards a carry, which is phenomenal for Matt Nagy standards. He was good. We definitely had an upgrade at this running position. We didn't run it as efficiently as we would have liked to later on in the season, but especially at the very beginning, we got better. And it was kind of surprising. Overall, at the end, it's to me, it's just a little bit better. I think that this was a stud position that we just have to look forward to for the next year. Having this group of running backs is going to be a blessing for us moving forward. Now, next position. This was one of the weirdest ones for me, was this wide receiver position. Now, coming in with the preseason, we lost Anthony Miller. We lost Javon Wims. We lost Riley Ridley. Now, some of those did not really produce. Ridley was hardly out there. And Javon Wims didn't necessarily do too much. When he was out there, it always seemed like he did well. It always seemed like he did well versus the Minnesota Vikings. I don't know why, but I just always remember him going against the Vikings because everyone else was injured, or Allen Robinson was injured, or we didn't need to play everybody, and he would just do well. And then Anthony Miller, he was out there, but he was always the potential guy. You always wanted him there because you saw some of the glimpses, but he never put it all together. He was always out of position, didn't seem to grasp the playbook. And honestly, he still looks that way right now. Now, we got rid of these people that didn't really produce too much. Miller, couple touchdowns. He usually got some touchdowns, but he wasn't doing a lot more outside of that. And then we bring in Goodwin and we bring in Bird. And I had on the list when we talked about this, we brought in Brashad Perryman, obviously no longer with the team. And instead we have Jakeem Grant. Now, when we were talking about this in the preseason, our assumption was that this was a huge win. Blake actually is quoted as saying this was the biggest win for the offense. He thought that this was the biggest group of studs that we brought in. And this was the biggest area that he thought we got better in the offseason. Now, when we're looking at this now, we're looking at this today, what happened during the 2021 season? Because to me, this was the biggest reason I would have to say that I don't think that this team did well from a passing perspective. You didn't see Demir Bird do anything for the first half of the season. It wasn't until the second half that he even started becoming relevant. So to me, I didn't see much of that, and I didn't see that next steps. And it's not saying that like Javon Wims was so much better, but it seemed like the offense was at least able to run. We didn't see Goodwin really do much as well. Goodwin really didn't have that great of stats. Same thing with Bird. I'm looking at this right now, and Marquis Goodwin, he had 20 receptions for only 313 yards. That's not great. He was targeted 40 times and only caught 20 of those passes. That's a huge, huge disparity. You want to see at least 60%. And you're just hoping, because you're hoping that your quarterback gets a 60% completion percentage. So that also includes throwaways. So you're hoping it's at least above 60%. But unfortunately, it just wasn't. It wasn't there. We didn't see any good production. And Demir Bird, really, it was 26 catches for 329 yards. We went in thinking that Marquis Goodwin was going to be potentially our number 3 guy that was going to have a good season. But unfortunately, it just wasn't there. Now, this is hard because to me, I think this is where you had this huge amount of regression. You had a big amount of duds. Now, the biggest reason is because what we didn't expect with Allen Robinson just having a terrible, terrible year. Allen Robinson, just going to pull it up, 410 yards. Cole Cometh had more yards than him. If you told me that Cole Cometh would have more yards than Allen Robinson, I'd be thinking that Cole Cometh is Mark Andrews. Cole Cometh is the next all-star tight end. But instead, Allen Robinson with a flop of a season. 11 total games started and only averaged 34 yards a game. 34. That's super sad. That's super pathetic for someone that we know how much talent he has, and he's not able to put it all together. It's just hard to see. And that's why I think that when we're looking back at the 2021 season, yes, like on paper, I think that Goodwin and Bird are better than Miller and Wims. They are. Miller can't stay on a team. Wims, I believe, is on the practice squad somewhere. They're not able to stay on teams, but Bird and Goodwin can. Now, yes, they're on our team, but I think that after this, they're going to still sign like a 1-year deal somewhere. It might be with the Bears, might be someone else, but they are better wide receivers. It's that production. And this too, I hesitate to say that it's the individual players, because when you're looking on paper, the quarterback position should have been better. It really should have. The running back position should have been better as well, and it was. But then the wide receiver position, same thing, should have been better. But your best wide receiver falls off the face of the earth. You don't see him anymore. You don't see the production. And then your backups, they just seemed lost in this offense. That's why good riddance to Matt Nagy. I'm excited about the next regime. We don't have to think about this anymore, hopefully. Now, hopefully when we actually bring in people, we have a legitimate scheme, a legitimate system, so we can at least be out there, because it's inexcusable to have a significantly worse passing offense with better passers on the field. Like Mitch Trubisky was, I just remember all the memes of Mitch Trubisky just overthrowing and missing wide receivers. And that was our quarterback that had better yards than all of the other quarterbacks that we had out there. It's just pathetic. It's just absolutely pathetic for what the Bears trotted out there from this offensive perspective. Just abysmal. So that is another big dud. So we have 2 duds during the season and 1 stud. Only 1 stud from the running back. You could have probably predicted that, but let's actually go over to the tight ends. This is a little bit interesting because really the only thing that we did was really add Jesse James. Yeah, there was a couple of like the backups that we kind of shifted around, but really it was kind of similarly the same exact team. We had Jesper Horsted that was out there. We had JP Holtz, who wasn't out there too much. He wasn't out there as much as we expected. But really, when we were analyzing this in the preseason, this just seemed like a plus. You add in Jesse James, a solid tight end who had a good relationship with Justin Fields in the preseason. This should be a plus, right? So that's what we said in the preseason. This should be an easy plus. Now, was it in the season? Now, when I'm looking at the production of the tight ends, I got to agree. I do think it was a plus, even though that we don't have tight ends dominating. Our second leading receiver was a tight end. Cole Cometh, yeah, if you watch Cole Cometh, he didn't look like an elite player. He dropped a lot of easy balls. He wasn't playing phenomenally, but still when you're looking at the production of the tight ends, remember 2020? We had to get so many different tight ends because we just had to hope. We just had to hope that one of them could at least play halfway decently. And now Cole Cometh, he's looking like a solid average tight end. I think you can definitely get better. But before, he was just kind of a little lost out there. And now he's putting up 216 yards. To me, that is a significantly better season than what he did last year. Now, last year, he only had a little over 200 yards, and you basically triple your production. That's a great season. And it's not just about the stats, because stats don't tell everything. I liked how they used Jimmy Graham. I thought that Jimmy Graham out there, he was blocking a little bit better, but then he was just kind of that weapon that they would just throw the ball to, and sure-handed would majority of the time catch it, except if it's from Justin Fields to kind of win a game. But I think overall, though, that it was a solid performance from a lot of these different tight ends. And overall, this is another stud group. It's not like they were dominating, but it was better than what it should have been. Cole Cometh went up. Jimmy Graham, you saw less of him, which was good. Jesse James came in and was a very good backup. And I'm looking at his receiving stats. He only had 62 yards. I thought that he had a little bit more, but still, he was 8 of 7 when he was targeted. That's what you want to see out of people that have those kind of lesser roles out there. And even Jesper Horsted came out there and made a good touchdown catch. It was just a good, solid person. So to me, this is another spot where we got better. And I'm just looking at this going, oh, why weren't we better? Because our running backs were better. Our tight ends were better. We have 2 position groups that were studs. Why were we so abysmal? Why were we so abysmal if we have some good players and good things that were happening to this team? That's just the frustrating part. But let's go over to this offensive line. This was definitely the hardest. This was hard in the preseason, and this is hard now. In the preseason, when we were talking about this, the 2 biggest losses were Leno and Massey. Now, this has been talked about before. I didn't hate Leno. I didn't hate Massey. Massey is someone who just wasn't healthy. So yeah, if you get rid of him, kind of not losing much because he just wasn't there for the team. If someone's not there, you don't lose much when you cut him. And then also you get rid of Charles Leno, who to me was a solid player. And honestly, you just saw him get a brand new deal with the Washington football team. Why? Because he's not that bad. He's a little wussy, not like wussy for a football player type of thing. He's just light. He's more that agile guy. He's not necessarily a big power guy. And I think that's where a lot of Bears fans didn't like him, was he wasn't a big power guy. He wasn't Tevin Jenkins. He wasn't Jason Peters. He wasn't Larry Borum. He wasn't those guys that would just push you off the ball. He was someone that was more of like, I just won't let you get by me. And that's why I think too, a lot of us blamed Charles Leno for the bad run blocking, because we just thought, well, hey, Leno's out here. He's soft. He's not the big guy. He's not pushing people over. But that must have been the reason why. And now we're seeing it's most likely just Matt Nagy's offense. But I digress. Let's get into this offensive lineman, because then who did we gain? Now, this is where in the preseason, we were talking about, we just added Tevin Jenkins. We added Larry Borum. We added Jason Peters. Let's see what he had in the tank. And then also we were getting James Daniels back, who was out pretty much all of 2020. So during 2021, we're also looking a little bit more optimistically about Sam Mustipher. We're kind of saying, okay, we know he's not the best blocker, but can he get a little bit better at blocking? And also he's kind of that guy in the middle that you can kind of trust to kind of run this offense. Now, that was true. And that's why also when we were kind of asking our thoughts, Blake actually said, on paper, this should be better. And I agree with that. When you're talking about this in the preseason, on paper, it should be better because Jason Peters should be better than Charles Leno. Was he in the regular season? Yes. Cody Whitehair should be the same as Cody Whitehair. Yeah. Mustipher should be the same as Mustipher. And James Daniels should be better than when Jermaine Ifedi was out there at right tackle and right guard. You would just have to say Daniels is better. Yes. And then at right tackle, whoever you have as that backup should be better. And in theory, it looked good on paper. I, in the preseason, was a little skeptical because of the chemistry. And when I'm looking back at this, not to flex, but I think I was correct, because what we saw at the beginning of the year was a lack of chemistry with this offensive line. If you get rid of a bunch of people, this offensive line is not going to be very cohesive. And I think that's what you're seeing, is that this offensive line struggled early on. Needless to say, the Browns game, you saw also a good handful of times early on in the season where Jason Peters could always block his guy, but there's a couple times on like stunts where him and Whitehair were just off on, okay, who's got the blitzer? Who's got this guy? And that's why every single week, one of the biggest things that we would preview is who blitzes a lot. It wasn't just because of Justin Fields. It was also because of this offensive line, because they had a difficult time with Peters to say, okay, you got him or do I got him? And honestly, I think that eventually they got used to it. They got a little bit better. But I think that they still had that stigma of the Browns game. I think they were better than what a lot of people thought. But it's hard to say if they got better or if they got worse, because if we remember, they weren't the best offensive line last year. But they weren't the best, they weren't the worst, but they were just not good. We were kind of clamoring for a brand new offensive line because of that. And I think too, when you're looking at this, if I'm trying to go back and forth to be like, did we get better? Did we get worse? And honestly, I'm just going to say that we broke even. It's a cop out of an answer, but I think after 2020, we're looking at this going, hey, this offensive line is not great. We have to upgrade. And then at the end of this, we're going, I think if I were to say I lean more towards a stud, I lean more towards that this is better than worse. And the reason, like I said, 2020, we felt terrible. 2021, we feel like there's hope. Now, part of that might be because we have Tevin Jenkins and Larry Borum. We feel like we have two tackles that we can build around. We have Cody Whitehair, who we feel like we can build around. Now we're just kind of saying, we just need a center, because we definitely found out Mustipher is just not the guy. You kind of wish he was, but he just doesn't seem like he's the guy. And then at right guard, you have to just really ask yourself, is James Daniels that person? James Daniels was a huge upgrade at right guard for us. But what's hard is that is the least important position on the offense. I mean, if you want to include fullback, but it's hard to say because it's just that interior spot. And if anybody disagrees with me, let me know who you think is the least important starting position on the offense, because it really is that guard spot. It's difficult because if the Bears trot out Alex Bars for a cheap deal, is that what you'd rather have and spend the money elsewhere? It's going to be a very interesting offseason with what they decide to do with James Daniels. But honestly, I'm leaning a little bit more towards the plus, more towards a slightly better because of that optimism, because of also we were able to block during we were able to run block, which was phenomenal. And Jason Peters was somebody that was just a pleasant surprise, and we haven't had tackle play. We haven't had a lot of play like that at a tackle since I don't even know when. I don't even know when we had an elite tackle, because we had Leno and Massey, and yeah, it's been a while. So I would have to say plus, just because of what Peters was able to bring. And it's not a big plus. It's not a big stud, but yeah. But that's the offense. Honestly, when I'm looking at this offense, it's like, how did we suck? And I've been asking that during this too, because the offensive line was better. Running backs were better. We're talking about 3 out of the 5 groups were studs. But this is the reason why. This is the reason why, like, the passing game is so important. Our quarterbacks, our passing offense was so off. It was terrible. We couldn't get the easy stuff. We couldn't get the basic stuff. It seemed like the wide receivers didn't want to be out there. And it kind of adds to what the rumor is that a lot of people were saying that this offense was a joke. That was the feeling around the locker room. And you can kind of see why. It felt like an unmotivated performance out of this offense. And really, like, if you just had solid quarterback and wide receiver play and a competent offense, I think this is a different story. So I think if you have the different offensive coordinator, different offensive scheme, this is a good team. I think that it did get better. The offensive line, a little better. It's not like all of a sudden, like, oh my God, this offensive line's incredible. It's like they got better from like the 25th offensive line to like the 22nd offensive line. So it'll be very interesting to see how they improve. But when you're looking at that and you're just overviewing the 2021 season, that's the biggest reason. This offense just did not perform, simply. And you're looking at and one thing too, we turned the ball over a decent amount. And one of the biggest reasons is Justin Fields fumbling. It's something that he's got to get better at. And it really is. Those fumbles are huge. He just needs to get better at that ball security. And if he does, I think that this team can kind of take it to the next level. And I know too, how can you say that this offensive line got better if they let up 58 sacks? Now, I think a lot of it came in one game versus Cleveland. And also, some of those is Justin Fields trying to escape or holding onto the ball too long and taking the sack. I think that's where the stats get a little bit more bumped up than they should be. They're a little bit more inflated than they should be. But yet again, I'm not saying this offensive line's amazing. I'm just saying it's slightly better than absolute trash that it was the year before. So moving on from the offense, because that was not good. it was not good to just say like this should be better, and it wasn't. Now this defense really did kind of put up some good defensive statistics. I think that they were in the top 10 with yards allowed, which is actually just absolutely insane to think about, because looking at this team, I never felt like they were that great, but honestly, they put up really good stats. From a defensive perspective, like, they were just very, very good against the pass, because not a lot of people had to pass it against them, and a lot of people were trying to run it. They were semi-stout. They also had a lot of short field position because of the inadequacies of the offense. Now, that's what makes it very difficult, because it seems like they were slightly worse. Like, there's reasons where I'm like, I think they're better, and I also think that they're worse. But let's actually just break it down by position, just like we did last time. Now, I'm not going to go outside linebackers or anything like that. I don't really believe in that. We're going to go defensive interior and edge and linebacker. So defensive interior. So we're talking about the guys that really kind of play the two people up front, the people with their hand in the dirt inside the tackles, the defensive interior spot. Now, in the preseason, we're bringing in Angelo Blackson. We just drafted Kairos Tonga, and we're also bringing back Eddie Goldman. And who we lost was really just Roy Robertson Harris and Brent Urban. And I had to like double take that, because it felt like we lost a lot more talent than just those two guys. But that's it. That's all the talent that we lost on that interior. And when we were reviewing this in the preseason, we were like, this is going to be amazing. This interior is going to lead this team. We were super optimistic in the preseason. Why? Eddie Golden was back. Akeem Hicks was finally, quote unquote, healthy. He was coming back with a head of steam, and we were kind of getting some nostalgic flashbacks back to the 2018 Bears when Goldman could just take on two people. Hicks is just tossing people aside. Now, Hicks, when he was healthy and when he was out there, he was doing that. We saw him dominate the Minnesota Vikings like he always does. But we saw Goldman out there, and Goldman didn't do much. So we were optimistic about it in the preseason. But to me, this is one of the biggest duds. Actually, we haven't talked about some of the other positions, but this was a huge dud for me when I was thinking about, did we get better from the 2020 season? Even though that we didn't have Eddie Goldman in the 2020 season, I felt like we took a huge step back because Hicks was kind of the same. When he was out there, the defense was better, and he was just not healthy. When Goldman was out there really wasn't that much of a change. Tonga was okay. Blackson was okay. But when Urban was out there, he was a lot better. Now, one of the quietest things that happened to this interior was the regression of Mario Edwards. Mario Edwards Jr., we hardly saw him out there. I want to just actually pull up his stats because I don't know how many how many snaps did he even take, because it just seemed like he really wasn't out there. I'm looking at this, and he only played, according to Pro Football Reference, he only really played 12 games and started one. And looking at this too, he only had eight tackles. Not good. 8 tackles, 2 sacks. So he really only capitalized on that. But he got a lot. I think we remember all the different penalties he got. He hit the quarterback 5 times, which isn't terrible. But the year before, he was a beast. Anytime he was in there, he was just dominant. Now, he kind of regressed back to the mean. He normally hasn't played that amazingly, and he took a step back. Another thing, too, that we didn't talk about is Jay Rodgers, the defensive line coach, wasn't there anymore. We saw Bilal Nichols also kind of take a step back, too. It's not like he was terrible. He just wasn't, like, he had a really good year in 2020 and just kind of regressed back a little bit. Not saying he's worse, but he just had a worse season. So really, this is a huge kind of just a bad outing, because before I loved our interior guys. And now I'm looking at this going, we got to get some more people. Blackson had a good end of the year, but throughout that, he had a lot of opportunities to produce. He just wasn't producing for me. So to me, we're starting off with a dud for this defense. This defensive interior spot, it should have been an improvement, but honestly, it just wasn't at the end of the day. Now, let's go out to the edges. So the edges, the people on the outside linebackers, if you want to call it that, for the 3-4 system. But really, I've totally forgot about this guy. We added Jeremiah Tachu in the preseason, and the only people we really lost were James Vaughters and Barkevius Mingo. So for us, we're saying, we said in the preseason that this should be a plus. And I know I personally was saying I love this as a big plus because Atachu to me was better than Mingo. Atachu obviously was injured, so we didn't really see much of him. But another big piece that I liked was, I said Robert Quinn was trash in 2020, and same thing with Travis Gibson. So they have to be better. And what do you know? 18 and a half sacks later, Robert Quinn is now a Pro Bowler and just a phenomenal player on the edge. We would have never have guessed that, but obviously you could have already guessed this, because I was even saying too, like, Khalil Mack would be back. Even without Khalil Mack, this is a huge stud position, a huge increase. To me, the 2021 season made us feel so much more confident in this edge group because of Quinn, because of Gibson, because, Atachu's coming back. He might be cut because of salary cap, but we have all this talent now at edge. We have Khalil Mack coming back. And it was one of those position groups that you felt confident in them at least producing. Travis Gibson wasn't like an all-star starter that you need to sign him to a huge deal. But still, he was a guy that was a good outside pass rusher. So to me, when he's that third guy, that Aaron Lynch role, if you will, I'm really excited what this edge group will do. And that's one of the big things to kind of take out of this is that we have a good edge group. And that's the thing that's exciting too, is when you're looking at our running backs and you're looking at the edges, these are the stud groups just as a whole that you just feel a lot better about because you have depth and you have people that are on contracts. While with a couple other position groups like wide receiver, yeah, we don't have a lot of people on contracts for wide receivers. So you feel a little bit less optimistic about positions like that. So started off with a dud on the interior, starting off with big studs on the edge. But let's go into the interior linebacker. And this is where it got a little difficult for us back in the offseason. So when we were looking at who we added and who we got rid of, it was really the inside linebackers. We added Alec Ogletree in the preseason. We added Caleb Johnson and we added Christian Jones. Now, who did we get rid of? We got rid of Woods. If you guys remember him, he was just more of a special teamer. He was no longer on the team, but really, we didn't really get rid of anyone else. The only other person that we kind of quote unquote got back was Danny Trevathan. Danny Trevathan, we were supposed to see him a lot more, but he was placed on IR. Now, when we are talking about this from a preseason perspective, Blake had the linebackers and he said just a small sprinkle of getting better. That's what he felt because he was saying, well, Ogletree should be better than whatever Trevathan was, and Trevathan should be better than whatever he was before. Now, fast forward to today, how did the 2021 season go for these linebackers? Now, Danny Trevathan, if it's hard to remember, it was hard to remember because he changed to the single digit. It wasn't the same Danny Trevathan out there. And when he was out there with that weird, like, kind of rotation of linebackers. He only played a good handful of snaps. He started playing a little bit better. Then all of a sudden, his age started taking over. It just seemed like he was injured. And honestly, I hope it wasn't age. I hope it was just the knee injury because ultimately that knee injury knocked him out for the rest of the season. So we didn't see Danny Trevathan, but we saw Ogletree. And honestly, Ogletree was just pretty disappointing. I thought that towards the end of the season, he was a little bit better, but that's hard to even say because at the end of the season, yeah, you look a little bit better, but where was this for the rest of the season? He was an easily targeted linebacker in coverage, and he was out of position on a lot of different running plays. So what did you have? You had Roquan Smith going beast mode and becoming the second leading tackler in Chicago Bears single season history. That's because he had to make all the plays. He was the guy that had to make all the tackles. And when I'm thinking about like stud, did they get better or did they get worse? I have to say that they got better for the only reason of Roquan Smith, because I think that Roquan Smith just keeps progressing as a leader, progressing as a linebacker, and he's getting more and more credibility. He's an all-pro again, but yet again, not a Pro Bowler. So obviously we want to just see, can he finally make that Pro Bowl? Can he finally be there? Because he sure as heck should be. But really, just same thing like Blake said in the preseason. To me, it's a sprinkle of getting better because of Roquan Smith. Was Ogletree better than whoever we had out at linebacker last year? I don't really think so. I don't think that he was that great. And honestly, I think that this is a huge position that we need to get right because you want somebody next to your franchise linebacker that you have on this team. It's exciting that he's on this team, but guys, come on, management. We got to get somebody in here to complement him and just get somebody. But now we go to probably, spoiler alert, probably one of the worst positions that we had. Now, this is the cornerback position. It's pretty evident why. Now, I was listening back to our preseason discussion, and we were already skeptical on this to begin with. And it's easy to know why. Because basically, the only losses that we had in the offseason were Buster Skrine and Kyle Fuller. And the only people that we gained were really Xavier Crawford and Artie Burns. because we didn't have Thomas Graham on the active roster. So to us, he wasn't on the active roster. He wasn't a player that was going to be playing significant playing time. And really, this is the reason why this defense was a downgrade. We said that this was a huge downgrade in the preseason because we said the only plus you could take was Buster Skrine was really bad. So in theory, anyone who's there should be an upgrade. Now, Duke Shelley was a slight little upgrade, I would have to say, but still, like, there were some veteran moves that you thought that Buster Skrine would probably make, but Duke Shelley was just better overall in coverage. And add on a couple different injuries to Duke Shelley and Xavier Crawford a little bit banged up, you had to just swap all these different people out. We had Marquis Christian as the starting slot also week 1, and that didn't work at all. So to me, this obviously was the huge downgrade. We had Kindle Vildor, who was the starter. When he was out there, it just was looking bad. Jalen Johnson, I do think, got better, but when you get rid of Kyle Fuller, a leader out there, a vocal leader, even though he doesn't talk a lot during his press conferences, he was a leader out there that was talking and hitting, and his play was doing a lot of the talking for him. You lose someone like him, and this defense changes, and it did. Kindle Vildor was not great. Artie Burns did come in and played a little bit better, but still, it just was looking abysmal. I think Jalen Johnson takes a step up, but really that opposite corner position and also just the constant switching out of people, it just seemed like they never got this position right. So to me, this is one of the biggest studs, if not the biggest stud that was out there. It might have been the wide receivers, honestly, to me, because I just did not like the play of the wide receivers in 2021, but the corner position was definitely one that was lacking a lot. Yes, the stats say that they were a good pass defense, but honestly, I just think that it was not a good pass coverage. They took a big step back. Kyle Fuller, we miss you. Hopefully he comes back, but probably won't. But then the last position that we have on this defense is this safety position. Now, the Bears safeties, really the only thing that they did was they added Marquis Christian. Marquis Christian did not play the best, as we know, but he did kind of have some versatility to kind of just play a couple different spots. They kind of played him when they needed a bigger kind of slot player in there towards the end of the season. But kind of Blake and my feeling in the preseason was that we kind of felt a little bit neutral. If anything, we were a little bit positive because we were saying, well, maybe Sean Desai can get the most out of the safeties because of his experience with the defensive backs, his experience also with the Vic Fangio system. Now, the Vic Fangio system, PFF loves this. I don't know why, but when people are in the Vic Fangio system, their inside linebackers get like the best grades and their safeties get the best grades. It's where Vic Fangio puts them in position where they just seem to dominate. So we were kind of hoping that they would kind of get that type of a boost with a production perspective. But when we're looking at this, it wasn't great. When you're looking at the safeties as a whole, especially the starters, Gibson started to show some of his age. He was banged up. He really kind of regressed at that position. And Eddie Jackson, still, we were hoping that he was going to do something a little bit more. But really, Eddie Jackson, it's hard to see him still not perform like the Eddie Jackson of old. And when I say Eddie Jackson of old, it was only like a couple years, but still, you want to see those big plays. He really hasn't done anything. I think the stat was that he only had like one pass breakup in the past, like close to like 2 years. He's just not the same ball hawk, or he just doesn't seem to be ball hawking like he once was. So really, to me, this is another dud. Now, this is what's really weird here. I'm looking at this defense just from the 1,000-foot view, and this is why I kind of give a lot of credit to Sean Desai. This defense, I do think that they got a little bit worse, but you're talking about you also had Khalil Mack gone and banged up for a lot of the season this year, but still, this defense played pretty well. All things considered, they played pretty well. And a big credit goes out to Robert Quinn for doing a lot. Robert Quinn, Roquan Smith, and Jalen Johnson just really kind of held it down. But you can kind of see why a lot of teams were able to run the ball on us. a lot of it is because this interior was so soft. And when I'm looking at this, we had the duds on the interior, corners, and safeties. We've just really had a lot of regression from those spots. Edge was awesome. And linebackers, yet again, linebackers were really that kind of neutral, similar to like the offensive line, where they weren't really much better. They weren't really much worse. They were just kind of They just this kind of the same, if not a little bit better, because of Roquan. Now, this is something that you just don't want to see with this defense, because it's kudos to Sean Desai for at least kind of keeping them together. But this is where, like, Ryan Pace, you could have at least signed a couple people on some veteran minimum deals. Like, come on, man. Because I know that he had to cut some people because of his salary cap issues that he had. But that's why, like, this defense going in, we expected a lot more. Now, in the preseason, we thought that just the interior, edge, and linebackers were kind of going to do a little bit better. And we were honestly right about the edge and the linebackers. But the defensive interior really disappointed. Corners disappointed as expected. And the safeties, it just didn't do as much as we expected because of Sean Desai. So ultimately, kudos. But really, this defense did kind of regress as a whole. But we're optimistic about the edge class. So last little bit, I got to just go through this a little bit. I don't think we actually went through it in the preseason, but I got to go to the special teams. So special teams, the biggest loss was just Cordero Patterson. We had Cairo Santos coming back. Santos, I thought that there was a couple spots. Yes, he finally missed some kicks. But some of those weren't really his fault. Some of the kicks that he was missing were far away, were like blocked, or a couple other little things. So honestly, you could say that it was a slight regression, but also when you lose Cordero Patterson, you do have that giant regression. You lose Sherrick McManus. Your gunners definitely took a step back. But then you at least had Jakeem Grant out there as a punt returner. And even when Daz Newsome was out there too, you saw a lot of progression from that perspective. The punt returns, I thought, were a lot better, because last year we had Tariq Cohen, but after Tariq Cohen, you had Anthony Miller, and you didn't really like to see him out there. And I think I forgot who it was. We had the guy with the dreads. It might have been something Harris from the Oakland Raiders. He was really bad. And we had Ted Ginn Jr. for a little bit. Like, it was just overall not good. So we at least got better at the punt returns. Kick returns we were good, but come on. Cordero Patterson is Cordero Patterson. But let's put a bow on this. Let's kind of wrap up this 2021 season. Now, this to me was not the season that we expected. And I think a lot of it has to do with the coaching staff. It really does. I think that they kind of held some stuff together, but good riddance. Thank God that they're gone. I think now we can finally start to rebuild. We can finally start to have a team that we want. What this reminds me of is very similar to with John Fox over to Matt Nagy. Because I remember with the John Fox era going, I feel like this team is pretty good, because we kind of had some close games. Now with this team, we didn't have a lot of close games. We got blown out a lot. And I felt like a lot of that was just kind of bad play calling, just bad execution from this coaching staff. Like what we're talking about. The offense should have been better. They just weren't. This defense, you're looking at who they were trotting out there. They really shouldn't have been that much better. They really shouldn't have. And that's exactly what happened. So to me, the defense pretty much performed as expected, except for Eddie Goldman. And then this offense was just abysmal. So let's get the new staff in there and let's bring back Club Dub. Let's bring back all these things and let's get a winning season. I'm excited for this offseason. We're going to be kind of changing some things around. I'm going to be doing some half-hour shows and just kind of some smaller tidbits. So you want to make sure to subscribe, rate us 5 stars. It helps us so much. So you can follow me at The Draft Bard on Twitter. You can follow the podcast at Unbearable Sport. You can follow us also at Unbearable Sports, basically everywhere else: TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Also, you can watch us live on Tiki Live. It's a new app that's on your phone. It's on your Roku. Just search for it, Tiki Live, all one word. Just look for the Belly Up Sports logo, and then you can find us with a whole bunch of other programs. We have golf out there. We have fantasy sports, a whole bunch of stuff. It's like free ESPN. Just download the app. You won't regret it. And Unbearable Sports Podcast, we're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.
Thank you for listening to this Belly Up Sports Podcast Network product. Some said we go belly up, so we made it our name, and we're still here.